Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order this public meeting, which is also a committee of the whole meeting of council, and welcome all members, and welcome everyone who's watching on the live stream this evening, and the couple of members of the public who are going to join us a little later to give us their views on the Transportation Master Plan. We're very glad that everyone's with us. So the second item is disclosures of pecuniary interest. I'll ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. What we'll do this evening is we have an information report from the director, which we'll hear. We have a presentation from the consultant, which we'll hear. And then we will hear from the members of the public who have asked to speak to council this evening. And then after that, to conclude the evening, we will take questions or comments from members of council. So if that's okay with everyone, then we'll proceed with the report from the Director of Infrastructure and Development. Amanda.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. We have been working with Paradigm Traffic Solutions and GSP Group for 2 years now to create a truly made-in Saugeen Shores Transportation Master Plan. From pop-up public meetings to stakeholder interviews to formal presentations, we have heard the concerns of our residents and businesses. I'm excited to share with you the work and to present the view for transportation in Saugeen Shores until the year 2031. With that, I would like to turn it over now to Jean Cartier from Paradigm. He's the Vice President and Chief Development Officer and our Project Manager for the Transportation Master Plan. Jean?
Great. Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you, Mayor and members of Council, for the opportunity to present this evening. I'm just going to share my screen now and run through the presentation that was made available ahead of time. So we'll just run through that this evening. So as Amanda mentioned, our firm, as well as GSP, we're pleased to be assisting the town with the preparation of the Transportation Master Plan. Let me just make sure I've got this set up correctly. Okay. So this evening's presentation is going to focus on sort of 5 areas. We're going to take you through just a very brief overview of the study, because it has been ongoing for a little while now. Talk about the engagement process that we followed in terms of ensuring that the views of the residents of Saugeen Shores and agencies that may be affected by the Transportation Master Plan were taken into consideration. Talk a little bit about sort of what we assumed were the future conditions that we were developing the Transportation Master Plan for. Briefly review the key elements of the plan. Given sort of the scale of the document, we're not going to get into a lot of details this evening about specific items, but very happy to take questions or refer people to the document, which is going to be available for the next few weeks, to be available to allow people to provide further comment or input on the final version, and then talk to you about what we see are the next steps in moving forward. So a Transportation Master Plan is really, it's an overarching strategic document of the town that helps to guide the development of your transportation infrastructure policies and programs. And the Transportation Master Plan gives some further guidance or direction as to how the town wants to grow responsibly from a transportation perspective. So how we do that is we look at existing and future growth patterns, look at what the transportation needs that arise currently as well as into the future, and then identify what the transportation improvements that would be recommended to address those future needs are. And then also, I think a key element of this document that I believe is going to be hopefully well used by the town moving forward is some policies for the operation and development of the transportation network. So in essence, it creates a blueprint for future action. It recognizing that it doesn't go into detail on every specific sort of minute or discrete item, but it gives you direction from a policy, infrastructure, and program perspective on how to move forward with your transportation system into the future. So as mentioned, it's a strategic planning document that addresses your needs to the year 2031 and beyond. We build on current town, Bruce County, and Province of Ontario plans and policies, so it fits in to the existing planning framework and context. So it had regard, we relied extensively on your existing official plan, policies and directions from the province, and future plans that we're moving forward. In doing that, we took that information, established a series of goals, strategies, and initiatives to achieve a future transportation vision for Saugeen Shores, which we'll talk about in just a second. It's also important to recognize that the Transportation Master Plan, as mentioned, is sort of a blueprint for action. So its implementation will occur through a variety of different tools, whether those be Planning Act applications or Planning Act tools, through future environmental assessments, through policies that the council may adopt, and through future capital plans. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. And something that's of importance is sort of from a, I guess, from a procedural perspective, is that in executing the plan, we followed the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment Master Planning process, which basically gives the municipality the ability to say that you've done the first steps of any future infrastructure projects and comply with the requirements that are specified in the appropriate environmental assessment planning document for this particular type of project. So maybe just a few words about the engagement program. As Amanda quickly mentioned, we did a variety of different techniques in the study in terms of reaching out to the community. So we, at the beginning, did a series of pop-up events and meetings, including a series of meetings with representatives of the community. We had a few pop-up sessions where we engaged the public, primarily, it was in areas of high activity. So we got a lot of good initial feedback. We also set up a project website, did social media blasts during the project, and had 2 public opinion surveys as we went through to gain community input and feedback on a variety of different items that we were seeking their opinion on. So the things that we heard through the engagement process is the importance of having a flexible long-range plan to help the town ensure that it can respond to its future transportation needs in an efficient and effective way. Something else we heard as well from a number of different sources was the importance of providing more travel options for people. And that was often coupled with some form of public transportation. We tried not to specify a form or function, but just the recognition that there are people in the community that don't have access to automobiles and are looking for options beyond sort of, just treating the private vehicle. That sort of goes hand in hand with the objective of wanting to complete an active transportation network. The municipality currently has a number of great routes and facilities, but there was recognition that you wanted to try to knit them together into more of a network. And then sort of fitting with that, we heard a number of concerns expressed about the rail trail crossing on Highway 21 and some of the challenges that users experience in being able to get across the roadway there. We also heard about a number of hotspot locations, so specific intersections or sections of roadway where there were concerns about traffic issues or parking or safety. We also heard from the public the desire to make sure that, if the municipality was going to continue to promote active transportation, that it was important to provide public education both for drivers and for cyclists, and ensuring that everyone safely uses the roadway. We heard a lot about, the great community character that Saugeen Shores enjoys, and wanting to make sure that we're not urbanizing or recommending that there be overly urban treatments applied to areas of the town to maintain its existing character. We heard about some concerns about public parking, some speeding issues, no surprise about traffic issues in the summer on Highway 21, and the need for alternative north-south routes, recognizing that 21 is really the only continuous route within the town. So building on what we heard through the public input, we then looked out into the future and what can the town expect from a transportation perspective growing forward. So based on work that was been done for the development charges bylaw update and some work for the official plan, we were given some information about future population, employment, and dwelling unit forecasts. And as you can see, the town is expected to grow at a rate that's greater than some historical averages over the coming, I guess it'd be 10 years now, but the information was sort of backdated to 2016 to align with the census information. So the town is going to experience some growth. And that growth in population is going to add another 1,500 to 2,000 vehicles to the road network within the town during the morning and afternoon peak hours. So recognizing that there was going to be growth within the municipality, there's some existing transportation needs to address, we came up then with a transportation vision and goals. And I'll just read the vision statement that the town would be comprised of unique communities connected by a diverse transportation system that prioritizes the safe and efficient movement of people in an environmentally sensitive manner now and into the future. And coupled with the vision, we identified 5 goals of ensuring additional travel options, promoting personal health, helping to create a local vibrant economy, helping to facilitate a sense of place, and ensuring that from a transportation perspective, the solutions were environmentally sustainable. So based on those goals and the vision statement, then we looked at different ways in which the town could meet future transportation needs. So obviously, the town could choose to do nothing, basically just keep doing what it's doing in terms of maintaining existing facilities, but not looking into expanding the system at all to accommodate the expected growth that's going to occur over the next 10 to 15 years. Another alternative is to look at just serving it solely by road improvements only. And then the third option, which sort of fits with the vision, the goals, and what we heard from the participants in the public engagement events, is that the town look at some sort of road improvements plus, and whether that be with active transportation, with public transportation, combination thereof, just recognizing that just simply road improvements alone wasn't the direction of this third strategy that we could move forward with. And part of the reason why we look at these sort of these different planning strategies is to help satisfy the requirements of the municipal class environmental assessment, which states that you have to look at a variety of different alternatives in moving forward from an environmental assessment perspective. So we evaluated these 3 alternatives against the 5 evaluation criteria that are listed at the right. And we came to the conclusion that the road improvements plus had the highest ranking of the 3 alternatives, recognizing that it met the goals in the best possible manner, and it being consistent with the way in which the community is looking to grow. So on that basis, we move forward with the development of a plan that fit that sort of strategy of being road improvements plus. So there would be a series of roadworks which are necessary to meet growth, as well as providing some alternatives to vehicles for people being able to travel within Saugeen Shores. So the way we structured the document is we structured it into a series of strategies. So the first strategy we'll talk about is the roads strategy, which is a fairly significant element, as it's sort of been the primary transportation delivery of the town. Recognizing though that it will expand, evolve over time, but it's still a very important element. So initially we looked at in the way in which the town develops its roads and streets, and recognized that to be able to better serve a variety of different users, whether they be automobiles or they be cyclists, pedestrians, that's something called complete streets, and it's sort of a philosophy whereby streets are designed, operated, maintained, and constructed to serve a variety of different users, and they do it in sort of safe and comfortable spaces. So we're recommending that there be a complete streets approach to moving forward with the town's road network. We've also proposed a number of road classification changes, which would seem to fit better with the network development plan that's being proposed in terms of roadway improvements, as well as the active transportation network. We've also outlined a series of neighborhood traffic safety policies that can be applied to requests that the municipality receives for things like traffic calming, always stop control, speed limit changes, pedestrian crossings, school zones, and community safety zones, as well as roundabouts. So there's a variety of different policy recommendations for council to consider in moving forward. As well, in the road strategy, we've recommended a series of road and intersection improvements to meet future growth and address some existing operational and safety concerns. We've looked at an alternate route around Port Elgin and Southampton for trucks, not recommending a new bypass, but we're identifying a potential route that when you look at it, it ends up being, as quick or quicker for vehicles to be able to go around the built-up areas in Port Elgin and Southampton. We've recommended some updated on-street stopping and off-street parking guidance for the municipalities. That's in how operate on-street parking system, as well as looking at future parking needs. But we didn't go as far as to say, this parking lot should be in this particular location. But we've suggested that that is an impending concern that needs to be studied in further detail through the parking strategy for the downtown area. Now, the active transportation strategy recommends a pedestrian and cycling networks for the town. So those would be an integrated system that will be comprised of both on-street and off-street facilities, and provides a recommended implementation plan, which we'll talk about in just a second. It provides some guidance for sidewalk expansion within the municipality. It provides design criteria for pedestrian and cycling facilities that town staff can apply in developing the infrastructure, as well as the other accompanying facilities. We talk about what types of trip end facilities and other amenities should be considered within the municipality. So things like bicycle parking, fix-it stations, whether you need storage for bicycles, things of that nature are things that are identified in the plan. And finally, we talk about having an approach to community outreach that builds on the work that the municipality has already done for the bicycle-friendly community designation, with the goal of enhancing the existing designation for the municipality. So sort of aiming higher to become a more bicycle-friendly community. Now, in terms of transit and future mobility, which is our third and final strategy, we make some recommendations about considering future public transportation options, recognizing that there are a number of issues associated with moving forward with public transportation. We're recognizing, and we're seeing in other parts of the world and Canada as well, that shared mobility is becoming more and more of an opportunity. Not maybe quite as excited about it as maybe we were 6 or 8 months ago, but there still are going to be opportunities for shared mobility, and the need for a future strategy around things like bike sharing or around e-scooters or any sorts of technology that sort of will be emerging. And finally, there's a recognition that automated connected vehicles are starting to become available, so there'll be growing interest and growing demand. So the municipality needs to position itself to be ready for that time when those future vehicles become more and more common, as well as the growing demand for electric vehicles. Now, in terms of phasing and costing, we've put together some rough estimates to give the municipality an indication of, sort of what this program would entail. So the numbers are on the screen. I won't necessarily read through them, but what we've tried to do is break the roads and cycling projects up into shorter and longer terms, recognizing that there needs to be, some recognition of available funding, as well as making sure that things fit together in a future capital program that staff will be bringing forward, as well as recognizing that there are also going to be a series of pedestrian improvements that are going to take some time to implement. Well, so we've provided a gross cost for those because we are recommending a sidewalk prioritization framework that staff would be using in developing their future capital plans. Now, from an implementation and monitoring perspective, we've also identified what the implementation tools and processes would be. So whether that be future EA, environmental assessment requirements, how things get implemented through official plan updates, how elements of the plan get implemented through development approvals, and some recommendations around things like how you do traffic studies, that sort of thing. Identified some potential funding sources to help implement the plan. We've also dabbled a little bit in the area of operation and maintenance standards that will help support what staff need to do to be able to take care of the planned infrastructure improvements, as well as recommending a monitoring and updating cycle to keep the plan relevant moving forward into the future. So in summary, the plan provides a multimodal transportation strategy and direction for the town to the year 2031 and beyond. And as I've mentioned, it's broken down sort of into three areas. The plan development followed the Municipal Class EA process and involved stakeholders and agencies. And tonight's event is to present the plan before council, as well as the public, and to begin a review period of consultation that'll then culminate in a recommended plan being brought forward to council in November, based on any final refinements that may be required to address comments that are received over the coming month. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Sure, thanks very much. Well, first, I think we're going to hear from the public. We have two members of the public who want to speak to us about about the plan that's been presented to us. So we'll bring them. And I just want to really remind everybody about the point that Jean made there about the public consultation, which is going to extend for more than a month from now. Council really is not going to be considering the final version of this until the 26th of November. So there's plenty of time. We have two folks who want to speak to us tonight, which is great. But if anybody else has comments or suggestions that they want to make to council, lots of time to do that in writing over the coming several weeks. So just wanted to make that point. But it looks like our two members of the public are with us, and I have Neil Minaj up first. So Mr. Minaj. You're muted there, Neil.
I'm not unmuted. I'm unmuted now, am I?
Yep, you're good.
You can hear me good? Okay. So thank you all, and appreciate this opportunity. And I would like to say, though, I'd appreciate everything you've been doing to keep us all safe in the community during this COVID-19 pandemic. I appreciate everything that you've been doing. Keeping us safe and mobile. So that's a good segue, right, to the Transportation Master Plan. And I'll be probably loosely referring to it as the TMP. I'm sure that you will and do. And if it's okay with you, I'll be so bold as to say that I probably refer to us all as us and we as well, because I believe you serve us and we all work together. So I have three things. I sent in a Q&A bank, my first run at it, and the Director of Infrastructure and Development Services, Amanda Froese, has done remarkable work in replying to my questions. I will have some rebuttal to that. Tonight is an opportunity for me to look at maybe a little higher level and take on 3 or 4 topics here. And then in the future, because as you know, I'm bold enough to also mention that I've lived in Port Elgin for 50 years, served on council a few times, and represented Port Elgin Ward. So in the future, I'd like to make another delegation on Northeast Port Elgin in particular, and bring to your attention some significant concerns I have in that area. So 493 pages I went through recently of what you're dealing with, and that's no small task. It's a great effort, and you involved the wanting to get this done, and the staff wanted to get this done, and here we are 2 years later with a very workable document with plenty of detail. So many pages and so hard to comment. So what I'd like to do is talk to begin with about active transportation and the lowest common denominator, which is the pedestrian. I believe the pedestrian is well looked after in this document. And sure, bike lanes, multi-use trails, street networks, roads, we use these terms quite a bit. So I'll be careful with them. And one of the comments in the plan is the sidewalk prioritization initiative, I believe it is, at least. Correct me when I am wrong, please, so that I can be sure to get it right. So recommendation 22 and 24 talk about installing sidewalks where there aren't any today. And I would like to think that before we venture into the future with roads that connect Arlington to the 10th concession and possibly Bruce Street to the 10th concession and Waterloo Street through to Devonshire. I'd like to think that we could backtrack and say, what hasn't been done? Where are the holes? Where are the busy streets today that don't have any sidewalks? And those that come to mind include, obviously, I'm going to talk primarily about Port Elgin. I've got one mention on Southampton, and that's for obvious reasons. But when we've got Catherine Street, Bricker, Falconer, Wellington, Arlington, Eastwood, and River, where I'm particularly based, all of those roads are acting as either large C or small c collector roads. And those are fully documented by road traffic counts as well, that say that those roads are collector roads. So we're encouraging active transportation, pedestrian walking, but we don't have the sidewalk infrastructure. So what I'd like to do is think that in that particular item, that we could prioritize these errors and omissions on possibly what's happened in the last 50 years and get them right first. In fact, the plan says you should have sidewalks on both sides of collector roads and at least one on one side. I think two sides of the road is ambitious, and 21 can certainly have two sides of the road, and it does. But I think the rest of our collector roads is probably too much to ask for. The next topic I'd like to talk about is the bypass. The bypass consideration. What I'm surprised is that there was nothing to talk about an option on bypassing Southampton. I understand the difficulty going across the Saugeen River and its tributaries in the Port Elgin and Saugeen Township world, but I believe there are some really strong possibilities for a bypass consideration of Southampton, which is a major piece of our concern with traffic movement, not just Port Elgin. So that's probably the only mention I have tonight on Southampton. Sorry for everybody that is Southampton based. The alternate truck route, as I like to call it, the ATR, is a biggie. And I think that we should, it's going to take a lot of meetings and a lot of talk and a lot of probably not budget numbers, not dollars, but a lot of background work to really bring this to fruition. I see many changes, intersection changes between 21 Highway and Bruce County Road 40, along with Bruce County Road 3 and 40, 10 and 40, and the Great Bruce Line and 40. Those are going to be potentially big traffic circle intersections. To move these transport trucks we're going to have a well-based road network to do that and to sell it to them. And as you know, I drove that and you've driven it, and you can see that there's advantages to this. But it'll take some work. I would gladly sit on a committee to work on the alternate trucking route. So that's my second pitch here. The one that's really of concern now is, for me, is how long we spent on trying to get parking on the main street of downtown Port Elgin. And here we have a major recommendation that speaks to removing almost all of the remaining parking spaces from Johnston Avenue to Green Street. That is significant. It's significant for those who are less able to move around as we are, most of us, and it's significant for the businesses. I would have wanted to see some comment on, I do believe it's there, on purchasing land for additional parking, and maybe a major subcommittee with the BIA. You've already got the BIA, but working with the BIA to look at side and rear entrance, maybe a grant and or a loan system that could help them pay for a whole new design, similar to what they did in Owen Sound, where the downtown area had rear entrances made from parking in the rear. And I think that we would do better if we concentrated on making those kinds of improvements before we took away the parking spaces that exist today in those particular 2 blocks. So to tie it all together, and in particular the safety aspect of sidewalks and pedestrian safety, I was hoping that the plan and or staff working with the plan would say, you know, there are millions of dollars of work here, and there's not millions of dollars in the budget to do more than we're doing already. The 10-year plan doesn't marry well with the 5-year budget plan. So the 10-year roads and streets plan is predominantly prioritized based on below ground infrastructure, sewer and water lines that are degrading. And therefore, those streets tend to get most of the money. And when they are rehabilitated, new sidewalks go in, and that's appreciated. With all of these other roads that I'm mentioning, that some major roads in the community, and especially in Port Elgin, where we're going to direct traffic or want to direct traffic as collector roads, I would hope that, and I'll bring you to your attention, probably not necessary, that your sidewalk rehabilitation budget is between $25,000 and $50,000 a year. So it builds about 2 to 4 blocks of sidewalk, or rehabilitates. But why are we rehabilitating, and why are we building new when we still have too many sidewalks that don't exist? So I'd like to think that we change our priority and we look at possibly interjecting a whole year in the budget where we will backfill all of the areas that are of a safety concern first. So take the 10-year master plan and back it up 1 year, and interject in 2022, because you'll need 2021 to plan for it. Interject a whole sidewalk initiation plan. And if that can't be done, sidewalks alone, then we're going to have to look at the streets as well. So I would like to bring that back to you. I have recommendations on how you could do that in another delegation, in another committee of the whole. That's my timer, and I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Neil, for those comments. Okay, then we'll move on to Paul Luco, who is also with us. And Mr. Luco.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'd just like to let, first off, everyone know that I'm just not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for a lot of the residents in the older section of Bruce Street. I've sent numerous emails to the town, to Amanda Frios, and I have gotten many responses, which I appreciate, and I say thank you for. But in reality, not a lot of action when it comes to addressing the issues that I've raised about Bruce Street. Concerns, I've put a sign up on the front lawn. I put flyers out. I have talked to many residents in this area. So I spent a lot of time on my front property, and it's a very consistent message that there's a huge concern of, as we go to open up Bruce Street more and more, this narrower, older section of town is at great risk. Safety for pedestrians, safety for cyclists, for motorists, as well as just destroying the character of this older part of Port Elgin. We really don't want a thoroughfare through our old residential area. And it's not about not opening about Bruce Street, it's about doing it correctly. And it's about, the town helping people to drive reasonably and responsibly on this section of town. So, it's about being supportive. Most of my responses were given to me were wait for the TMP. And that's been going on for almost 2 years now. Wait for the science, wait for, the answers that will address Bruce Street. So I did. I've been waiting, and I went through the document. I went through the recommendations. I've gone to other documents that are relative to, the situation that we're dealing with in this town as well too. The science, from what I've gathered from Jean's report, is number one, speeding. Many times through the document and the recommendations and the main body, It's a recommendation that says collectors and residential streets within the town of Saugeen Shores should all be 40 kilometers an hour. The only exceptions being potentially the arterial roads or collectors that do not run through residential sections. I was going to say quite a bit more about the speeding, but since that is a very strong recommendation of the document, it's noted many times. You know, my question to the council and to the town, recommendation number 9, you know, will they acknowledge that they now have the science that supports a 40-kilometer speed limit on all streets within our town, including Bruce Street, which is a collector. Couple other things. You know, again, I've had many thank yous from people who've come to me and said, thank you for speaking up. Thank you for putting up the signs. And I've informed them that I would be speaking tonight. And they said, thank you for that as well. There's a lot of people that feel strongly about this, but as you know, with other issues as well, they just simply don't speak up because they're just busy in the trenches of life. So, you know, I feel I'm speaking for them. I guess I've reviewed the TMP body. Speeding, again, the document that Jean produced, you know, it clearly identifies the risks involved in collisions between vehicles and pedestrians when you get speeds above 40 kilometers an hour. And he even identified, you know, that it rises from 50 to 70% for vulnerable road users. So it completely supports the recommendation to reduce the speeds to 40 within the town. So again, to me, that was extremely good news. I'm glad that that was one of the recommendations. You know, again, one of the concerns is that the people in this area see basically the new sections of Bruce Street, they're really the widths of an arterial road. They're 4 to 5 lanes wide. And the concerns are, why is the town building that section of the road so wide when you simply know that you got to choke traffic somehow through the older part of town? You can't, you know, unless the town's planning on buying up all our properties and going 4 lanes through the center of town, creating an official bypass, we really have to deal with this section of town properly. Okay. So I get that's on speeding. You know, I'm just going to leave it as recommendation number 9. I think the way it's worded is great. I think the information that it provides is great. And I strongly hope that this council takes that recommendation and moves forward with it. When we're talking about dollars, budgets, this is not a big expensive thing to do. It's signs. It's, you know, whether you call it, you know, signs when you enter the community or highlighting signs on certain roads. You know, many collectors are already posted at 40. So this isn't a huge change. And on that note, I'd also like to thank, you know, in this forum, the people who are driving responsibly in this town along Bruce Street. There are many of them, and thank you for that. There are still, though, contractors, you know, other individuals and stuff like that really treat this part of this town as an expressway. It's I'm more relaxed, quite honestly, sitting at Chester's on the patio than I am sitting in my front yard at times when traffic is going by the front door, you know, accelerating hard, braking hard, 60, 70 kilometers an hour. It's, you know, it gets a little out of hand. Traffic calming. The other thing that I thought was very interesting in Gene's document, and I did a lot of reading from his documents and I looked on the internet and went through a lot of stuff. So, you know, a couple questions. Number one, if traffic calming is done correctly, and Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, basically it's self-governing and there really is supposed to be no additional enforcement if it's done correctly. If the speed limit is set on a road and is recognized by the drivers that this is the right speed limit for the road, really the public generally corrects itself. My concerns are, if we move forward with dropping the speed to 40 in this area, what are we going to do with the street to inform people that 40 is the speed limit, it's the right speed limit for this road? If you leave it wide open, people are still going to see it as an expressway. So that would be my, you know, my next concern. Question or other very definitive statements in the document where the town will not consider all-way stops as traffic calming measures. You know, I have asked for, you know, potentially 4-way stops at Joseph or, you know, Falconer or just to actually break up this wide open section of Bruce Street. According to this document, if you're looking at traffic calming, this simply isn't an answer. It's a relatively cheap answer. I mean, again, we're talking about changing the bylaw, installing some signs, educating some people, and reality is people got to stop. But if that simply is not going to be considered for traffic calming along this part of the city or a part of the town, what are the other options that are the town's prepared to install? And what is the money involved in installing them? Because they're all significantly more expensive than basically just posting signs and putting up four-way stops. And just, on that note, I'd like just to make a comment of, Joseph and Bruce Street. If anyone has ever parked their car there in the morning when the kids are crossing to school, it's where it widens up, and it's an endless lineup of families that are crossing that road to get their kids to school. And again, there's nothing there to slow down people except their own, cognizance. So again, if you want to start somewhere, that's a pretty good place to start keeping families safe from high-speed driving. I guess another thing I've noted is, again, along the lines of traffic calming, pardon me as I just flip around here. We're basically looking at two north-south routes, which is going to be Goddard Street and it's going to be Bruce Street. That's the harsh reality, but I know that's not going to change over time. It's simply going to be opened up. You look at Goddard Street right now, and you compare it to what Bruce Street could be. Bruce Street will be the preferred route for all traffic. I mean, if you look at the number of stops, the width of the road, the wide open spaces with no interruptions. So really what you've got is you've got Goddard Street with traffic calming on it that's going to direct traffic onto Bruce Street. And I don't think that's acceptable. So something proactively has to be done to Bruce Street to prevent this from happening. If you're going to open it up, and I know you are, it has to be opened up in the right way. And these measures have to be in place before it's opened up. It's a lot easier to initiate correct behavior as opposed to trying to correct it later on. We all know that making changes are much more difficult than starting out the right way. He goes through the stages of his traffic calming procedures. And I have a couple questions about them. It's about determining whether you need calming on this street. And you look at cutting through traffic. How do you determine how many cars are cutting through the neighborhood as opposed to, I am not against at all this road being used by residents of this area. That's what it's for. The operating speed, again, he mentions, the 85th percentile of people driving the right speed. My understanding would be that if you drop the speed to 40 kilometers on this section, which again, I'll say, I truly hope you do, it's about getting that 85th percentile to be driving within that limit or within 10 kilometers of that limit. So again, what kind of traffic calming are we going to do to make sure that happens? One of the comments, I can't remember if it was his document or one of the other ones I pulled up, was basically successful 40 kilometer zones and 40 kilometer speed limits are generally self-enforcing. The active compliance should have no expectation that the police provide additional enforcement. Again, my comments aren't about the town going out and putting radar on Bruce Street and nailing people and getting money out of people's pockets. It's really about getting people to drive properly themselves. Another concern that I have, and again, once you go through stage one, you get into stage two, you're doing detailed evaluations, and then you get into surveying the residents. And I just noted from, looking at, what the requirements are that, if you have to get a response rate of 25% of eligible households, and then 51% of the respondents have to be in favor of traffic calming, if this doesn't happen, traffic calming goes away. So my question is, you've got 50, maybe 60 households on Bruce Street. All you have to do is make that survey big enough to dilute those 50 people right out of the mix. And you could have 400, 500, 600 people that just say, I just want to rush through town. And the 50 people on Bruce Street, just their voice just doesn't get heard because all of a sudden, number one, you don't know if you're going to get 25% compliance when you make a survey big. And number two, even if you do, the 51% required for calming measures will get whitewashed away by other people who don't live in the area. So my question would be, why wouldn't the residents who live directly on this part of the street have a greater voice on what happens in their area as opposed to, other people? And again, it was, a big statement. If resident support is not attained, the request will be denied regardless of the prioritization score. So you could go through the whole process, and then you do the survey at the end, you don't get the results you want, or the town, depending on its direction or where it wants to go, does get the response it wants, and the traffic calming goes away in this part of town. My other questions would be the traffic calming process. everything in the document to me seems to be reactive, as opposed to let's put things in place before things get bad. Whereas it seems, okay, no, we've got an issue. We've got to submit it to the town. The town's got to start this process. I have no idea what the duration would be involved in this process. But if we get into this, all the measurements and all the science and the surveying, you could have a problem again. I feel it's been going on for at least 2 years, could drag on for years before we could even get any type of resolution. Again, I'm looking for something to deal with a problem now, not a problem that's going to be in 4 or 5 years. I guess that's most of what I got to say tonight. I guess a couple direct questions for the council will be about, are they supportive of this 40-kilometer speed limit for Saugeen Shores? Hopefully they are. The next one would be, can we, whether it's a subcommittee, whether it's, I don't know the format. I know in the original slideshow that Jean produced months ago, it said that if we are going to affect a certain street, we will bring neighbors or we will bring people in who live on that street to form some type of committee to discuss the traffic calming measures in their neighborhood. Again, I would be very happy to sit on that type of committee to look at, how can we make, the vision to me is the street opens up, but it opens up in a really nice way. We have some really proactive traffic calming measures in place that keep people driving the appropriate speed limits, and the people who shouldn't be on this street, they should be on Highway 21 if they're going straight through town. That's what it's for. I think that's, basically what I'm looking for is the support from the town and the council to help the majority of residents of this town make the right decisions when they're driving on Bruce Street. And I think that's really what this TMP seems to be all about in the science of traffic calming. And that's all I got.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. I wonder if before we move on to members of council, if either Jean, you, or the Director of Infrastructure want to make any comments to either the comments from either Mr. Minaj or Mr. Luco.
I'll just quickly thank both of them for their comments and say that this report is exactly what we're looking for to address those concerns. So ideas of sidewalk prioritization coming back to council in 2021 with the sidewalk policy so that we can align that with our capital plan. And we would see that those capital plans are changing because of the guiding document that this is producing. So we'll see that sidewalk. You'll start to see bike lanes, routes, and painting on streets as we do reconstruction, and even in operational changes where we can throughout the year. Again, coming back to council for direction on some of those things. Same with Bruce Street. I think having a group that discuss what to do in Bruce Street is a great idea. And when it comes to the traffic calming policies, we are going to be looking at the neighborhood to get it right. So if you write in applying for traffic calming at Bruce and Joseph, the pool that we're looking at for respondents in the survey will be appropriate to that intersection so that it doesn't dilute out to people coming in from Paisley or from Allenford kind of thing, for sure.
Jean, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I'd like to again thank the speakers for their comments. They're very helpful. Maybe just one point of clarification with respect to the proposed or the concept of parking on Goderich Street with respect to the downtown core. It's not actually something that we're formally recommending at this point. What we're recommending is that the town look further into the implications of, like, at the end of the day, it's a trade-off between traffic flow and parking. And what we're suggesting is that we're not in this type of study going to that level of detail typically, because I think, as Mr. Minaj has rightly put it, involves a lot of stakeholder engagement to talk about things of that nature. So what we've said is that we're recommending the town study it in further detail. And if the desire is to put more focus on traffic movement, the implication is the reduction of parking. And so it's that trade-off that we're talking about in the report. And if we have if we have maybe led people to believe that that's the recommendation, then maybe we need to adjust the wording a little bit. But it's to make people aware that, you know, there's a problem that came up through conversation, the traffic movement in the core area. So one of the solutions is to remove parking. So, but we recognize that has some significant impacts for the downtown businesses and the like. So we realize that a balanced, you know, review of it still needs to be done. So maybe I just wanted to make that one point of clarification, just so that people that might be listening in were sort of aware that's sort of where we're heading with that particular item. And a lot of the comments that Mr. Luco made with respect to the traffic calming aspects will be dealt with through the process and the policy should council adopt them. You know, it would set the ball in motion to be able to consider that section of Bruce Street, because up until this point, there really hasn't been a formal policy or procedures or a recommendation around the types of traffic calming measures that the municipality would consider. So if the plan is adopted and the recommendations go forward more or less as they are, there will then be, you know, there will be a point where you can actually start forward through that process.
Okay, thanks very much for those comments, and thanks again to Mr. Minaj and Mr. Luco for your comments. And I know there was some question as to what council's views are on all of this, and I suspect you're going to hear some of those views here now, and certainly over the coming several weeks we're going to be taking more public input. So but then after come the 26th of November, beginning with the adoption of or they are receiving this document, I suspect you're going to see some of the low-hanging fruit that's in the document start to roll out, and council can start to consider some of the specific recommendations in the document as well. So you'll be hearing, I'm sure you'll be hearing plenty from council on the recommendations in here, you know, in relatively short order. So with that, we'll move on to questions or comments from members of the committee, and Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I took the time to read over. Let me get the view on it. Okay, I took the time to read over the plan, and it was obvious to me there was a great deal of work, and I recognized some of the comments as being relevant. I might even made a couple of them at the pop-up meetings or at the open house. When I made a bit of a list here of items that popped out to me, and some of them are to do with things that are in the plan. I like the idea of the calming measures, the speed bumps, and where they'd be appropriate, especially if they were seasonal. I like the idea of the transition zones recommendation. But some of the things that I thought were maybe missing from it, and maybe they were disguised in other words, was and I realize this is largely an urban plan. I mean, it does talk about rural roads and about bike lanes on connecting lines, but most of the parts of this plan dealt with the settlement area. And but I was interested to read about the bypass, and I was wondering if there was a bypass, is something like that enforceable? Could we pass a bylaw that required trucks or heavy equipment to take bypass routes, or is that would just be a suggestion? Because I know the preferred bypass of Port Elgin is right up my road. I see particularly of interest is the garbage trucks out of Southampton that come by 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, and that is the bypass. But I think probably the County Road 40 would be a better bypass. One of the things that I was looking for in there that I hope to be there that was missing was the coordination of traffic lights. We have, there was a lot of comments about the number of traffic lights that you encounter as you're going through Port Elgin in particular, and then a couple more in Southampton. And what I know in some areas, some other cities and towns, they coordinate the timing of those lights, whether it's done electronically connected, wired together, or whether they're wirelessly connected together, or say that also the timing of those lights. So when you know, the left-hand turn lanes onto Green Street and Gustavus and Goderich are very handy during peak traffic flows when people are trying to get around. But if you ever come through town on a February night after a late night council meeting, and you're the only car on the road, it's sort of frustrating sitting there waiting for the advanced light coming the other way so you can get on your way. I think that if we could change the timing of those lights so that the advancements turn off after a certain period of the day and then turn back on during the more busy times, and also coordinating the lights so that you don't involve in that situation where you come up on a traffic light and you hit every red light all the way through town. If there was I know in some areas they sequence them so they all turn green at the same time and they all turn red at the same time. Those are the things that I was looking for that I would have hoped to see in recommendations that were perhaps I might have not seen it because I didn't maybe read every line by line, but those are the things that I was hoping to see. And I wonder if there was any consideration given to those, particularly the traffic lights.
Sure. And I'll just ask a point of clarification from what the councillor just said. He was talking about the bypass route, and Dave, you were suggesting that it went up your street, right? The 6th.
Yeah, that's the most common route. Yeah.
Okay, but because what's recommended, I think, is up County Road 40, right?
Right.
So that's okay. Just wanted to make that clear. I wasn't quite sure if that's what you're saying. Oh, good.
That seems like a logical plan to me. And
okay.
The question was, is it enforceable?
Understood. So does either Jean or Amanda want to answer the council's questions?
I guess I'll start, unless Amanda would like to. The director would like to begin. So in terms of the first question, Councillor, through the mayor, with respect to is it enforceable? No, it's actually not. It wouldn't be enforceable because there's no mechanism within the Highway Traffic Act to force vehicles onto a particular route. They do have, heavy vehicles have the right under the Highway Traffic Act to access areas, to make local deliveries, et cetera. So it's very difficult to be able to say at this point, no trucks going past here. But what the intent of this is recognizing, like, we contemplated looking at a separate new bypass of the town, but given the topography, the water crossing, just the general volume of traffic, it would be very difficult from a cost perspective to make the argument that you could do it. So the next best alternative was to try to look at existing roads where there was at least some logical pattern that trucks could follow that didn't necessarily take them dramatically out of their way. And we did a little bit of, travel time comparisons between the two routes, and the travel times end up being almost exactly the same via both routes. So, that was something that we thought was important. And a part of it's education, part of it will be through signing, a part of it will be through improvements. I think Mr. Minaj had mentioned things about, that there needs to probably be some infrastructure improvements along the way. But at this point in time, since the roads involved are outside of the town's jurisdiction, we thought the next logical step is to engage the upper tier municipalities as well as the province in terms of coming up with a strategy. This sort of strategy has been used in other regions and counties in Ontario to varying degrees of success because sometimes, no matter what you do, the vehicle operators are still going to want to drive through town because they want access to a service, whether that be a donut shop or a fast food place, or they need fuel, something of that nature that requires them to have to travel through the built up area. So, but for ones that are just passing through, there can be a degree of success in terms of encouraging them to go via an alternative route. The second item you raised with respect to the coordination of traffic signals is sort of maybe hidden a little bit in one of our tables. Something that we recommend in table 610 is to develop seasonal traffic signal timing plans, which is code for coming up with time of year traffic timings for signals that are responsive to changes in the traffic patterns depending on the time of year. And the other part we make there is we say optimize signals as appropriate. So optimizing basically means trying to make sure that they all fit together well. If it's preferred, we can simplify that language a little bit in terms of take it out of the engineer speak and maybe make it a little bit more user friendly for people. But that was the intent of that recommendation, is to get at that very point of making the signals better timed on Highway 21 through town.
And my only addition through you, Mr. Mayor, is that the county's doing their transportation master plan now. So we've shared a lot of our traffic data with their consultant. We've given them this draft report and made comments where our report has recommendations that they would need to implement. And this traffic or truck alternate route is one of those comments.
Good. All right. I think I saw Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jean and Amanda and your staff. This is a very accurate, I think it's an accurate recognition of what I've heard as common community concerns. Gives us, I think, some far-reaching suggested methods of mitigation and also some short-term ones. Some of the points that I do have some questions, but I just wanted to run through some of the points that I appreciated in there was the detailed emphasis on active transportation, both pedestrian and cycling, and the great detail for that. The methods of traffic calming, I too really appreciate and found it very interesting to look at the different methods and the pros and cons of those, as well as the protocol. And I think it's really important to have that input from neighborhood committees. So I appreciated that. The recommendation for uniformity of speed limits, I like that, as well as the community safety zones and school zones, and the protocol for how you would decide whether those were appropriate. I am a big champion of maintaining the character of our cottage areas. So I really appreciated that. I also learned a new word, Woonerf. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the Dutch term for the shared street concept of cycling, pedestrian, and motor. So that was, and I think, you know, that's, that I think ideally describes what many of our residents who want to maintain the character of those cottage areas and heritage areas, really, that's what they really value. So I do have a couple of questions though, and I know that you have answered those for me earlier, but I'd like to ask them because I think that members of the public may want to hear the answers to those as well. Now, we just talked about the parking on Goderich Street, and one of the, I realize it's not a firm recommendation for right now, but one of my concerns as a member of the accessibility committee for the town was the suggestion that accessible parking spaces should be relocated to minor roads adjacent to Goderich Street. And my concern about that is that I think that would be create a hardship for some individuals who need to have those accessible parking spots on Goderich Street. So that would be my first question. What would be your, I guess, rationale for doing that? And I know it's not a firm recommendation at this point, but if you could speak to that. I've got several questions, so it might be easier for you to just
take them one at a time.
Yeah.
Sure. Amanda.
So thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. Our thought with that is it's safer to be exiting and entering the vehicles on the side streets. And because our blocks are so short, we have the opportunity to provide similar distances from the barrier-free parking spaces on those side streets. When we look at the parking analysis downtown, that could be something that's included in that specifically. And you look at the services that are there today and the higher demand for those accessibility pieces. So that is definitely something that can be included.
Great. Okay. One of the points I know that you recognized in terms of major concerns for the public, and this has been going on for many years, is the rail trail crossing at Highway 21. The plan's recommendation is to place signage on the rail trail at concession 10, informing cyclists of the unprotected crossing and advising the use of the alternative waterfront trail. I know that I asked you about including also signage for cyclists coming from Southampton, and suggested perhaps maybe at the at McNabb and South Street entrances, and maybe even the Memorial Garden as well. But I know that many people still want to use that crossing, and it is something that we have tried to talk to the province about, and have talked to the province about. The director met with provincial representatives. They came, they did studies about 3 years ago. Would you, though, explain why we're not considering more proactive measures like a speed limit reduction between Southampton and Port Elgin to 60 kilometers an hour, or perhaps a flashing signal to alert motorists to the crossing?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The major reason is that it's not our road. We are not allowed to put that infrastructure, those things on that. It's not connecting link. That's MTO corridor. It is a provincially owned, maintained, and operated highway. So it is not up to us. We took many proposals and requests to MTO over the years, and their response back is that it's not in their best interest. They need to be moving traffic through there, and they have their own rules that they need to follow.
Okay, just a follow up, if I may, on that one. So the 60 kilometer an hour reduction, I know you explained to I believe the council, as well as the Rail Trail Board, at the time when this decision was made by the province not to make the change. But would you mind explaining why it's not possible to reduce the speed from 80 to 60 from Southampton to Port Elgin?
Sure, and through you, Mr. Mayor, it's the same as our speed limit policy that we have in the back of this transportation master plan. You take a look at the conditions of the road and then determine the speed limit based on those conditions. So in this section leaving Port Elgin, there's not enough driveways, hydro poles, those sorts of crossing things that tick off the need for a 60 kilometer speed zone. It's also outside our settlement area, so I don't see that changing. And then meeting the warrants for the reduced speed limit.
Okay, thank you. My last question is about, this is from Appendix B, page 32, and it's about the sidewalk prioritization policy. This section says that one factor determining priority should be based on the number of resident requests for sidewalk improvements within the preceding year. I think that's too short a time. I am not sure why we wouldn't keep on file any kind of comments. I don't know, why not 5 years? And I understand that yes, needs may change, people may move away, whatever, but I wouldn't think it would be that much difficulty for us to review all the comments that were received on that particular neighborhood or area. But if you want to comment and explain what your rationale is on that preceding year limit.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, we can keep the comments on, and we do have them there. When we take the sidewalk request, if someone was to ask for a sidewalk, we use the distance block to block. So if you think of Bricker Street, someone requests sidewalk clearing and they live halfway between Green and Gustavus, we would put that block and that length of sidewalk into the calculation. and keep the comment. So that stays, and there's becomes a running total of the meters within that route. So we could see about meeting the snowplow warrant, or if we can afford to buy a new snowplow. So that does stay around. The idea of limiting the time frame is so that if things change, it's not stale information. So it's more of the review needs to happen every year and make sure that those comments are still applicable.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, further questions? We'll get Councilor Rich and then Councilor Schreider.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there were a great report, a lot of great information, a lot of money that can be spent if we want to, for sure. One of the great things that we have going on in our community right now is the Attainable Housing Task Force. I think that it's currently looking at how we can help provide for low-income earners. And I think that the next step to that, almost that works hand in hand, is transit and future mobility. So I would call that almost attainable transportation that would go hand in hand with attainable housing. So that if we're allowing or creating opportunities for people with lower incomes to be able to live in our community, we should try and put stuff in place once that's going on to help make sure that they can get from place to place in our community. And it's a big task, but I like that part of the report. I like the idea of timed lights that Councillor Matt was talking about. As well, one of the things about active transportation, when I look at it, we'll go back to the crossing on 21 Highway. If you talk about moving people down to go on the waterfront between the communities of Southampton and Port Elgin, it becomes active transportation, but not really timely transportation. The great thing about the rail trail, for anyone that's ever rode it, is it does provide a very direct route. And if you're on a bike, you can actually move between the communities and in the months where the weather's good, and in a very good way. So that's to me a big problem that we have to solve. That's obviously a very dangerous area, and what we want to do is we want to create speedy transportation routes, whether it's the crossing there or creating the rail trail in a different dynamic. That's going to be a big part about making active transportation accessible to people in this community. One thing that I would like to, and so these are just comments obviously, but one of the things that I would like to ask is I've heard different numbers about how much it costs for roundabouts. I think that we do have a lot of traffic lights in our community, but another way to approach that issue is through the use of roundabouts. So if that is an affordable way in which to kind of slow traffic down and to move traffic between different points, I think that's certainly worth researching. So yeah, those are my comments for whatever they're worth, and I thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Councilor Schreider.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Mayor, a good master plan is just good planning in my mind. And so I think that that this is a guiding document for us to use, not just up until 2031, but well past that as well. Very large document with lots of content. So do I support all of it that's in there? No, I don't. But I do like a lot of it. I think it's a lot of great ideas in there, and a lot of good information for us to use. Tonight, I'll just mention or highlight a few things, and I'll formulate some comments for Jean and Amanda over the next couple of days or a week. But definitely love the fact that we're addressing the speed, recognizing it, and then recommendations in order to address that. I like the calming measures of the options and also the matrix. So what works in one neighborhood or type of road will not work across the board. So we do need to have the different matrix and apply what works best or what would be most effective. So I appreciate that. I think that this will help staff develop, but also maintain a very strong capital forecasting program. And I know Amanda has that with her staff as well. So I think that this document will assist her in that. I do share the concerns with the sidewalks on two sides of the streets. I think there's some issues or concerns that I have with ongoing operational costs. I'm not sure that we do have, I think we had talked about it a little bit earlier, just with regards to the amount of requests we get for additional sidewalks in some areas. So I'd like for us to prioritize or to look at those as Amanda has indicated how they track those, and that we look at those. I don't think that when we build a new road, we just should put 2 sidewalks in just because. So I think that we have to look at that as well. Downtown parking, that was something that's been talked about, but it's unique. I think we need to look at unique solutions for each distinct community. And I think Port Elgin and Southampton, they're 2 downtown cores. They're very, very different. So not one option will work for both. So nice to have options in there for consideration, but it would be difficult to remove downtown parking. And I really like Councillor Grace's comments about accessibility. I think bang on with that as well. The older or newer neighborhoods or distinct communities, I think that we would still have to maintain the character and the function. I think that Paul, when he spoke tonight, I think his reference to Bruce Street, old Bruce Street versus new Bruce Street, I think that's a very valid comment, and agree with him as well. The 4-way stops, I didn't quite catch that in my review of the document. So I personally like 4-way stops, especially new stop signs or new 4-way stops. I do feel that they're effective. I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about that as to why perhaps they wouldn't be recommended if they're not. Love the active transportation as well. I think that that's important to our community. And I think another thing that maybe my last comment, so I don't take up too much time, but involving residents, and whether it's the master plan overall, but also in distinct neighborhoods. I think we heard that tonight, but also just be aware of for us to plan for any of the impact of the measures or new things that we are going to implement. So for example, Bruce Street was referenced tonight as well, but I'll use something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago at council is a detour route. But how does that detour route affect residents that are along perhaps the not assigned detour route, but the people will just travel the easiest way or the quickest way to get from point A to point B. So I think that type of planning and awareness will help us. I think it's a great draft. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Amanda. I think it's just a wonderful process and a great example of public engagement. So I appreciate that and looking forward to more comments and more input to it. So thank you.
Thank you. The councillor raised a comment just there about 4-way stops. And I know Mr. Luco raised the same thing. And I just wondered if either Jean or the director would like to just make a comment about your specific recommendations there. So everyone's clear on what you've recommended and why.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the council. Our recommendation on traffic calming is that the use of signs by themselves doesn't tend to be an effective long-term traffic calming solution. One of the particular issues with stop signs is that the proliferation of stop signs that aren't intended to alternate right away. So the purpose of a traffic signal or an always stop is to alternate right away between conflicting travel patterns. So when drivers don't perceive that there is that need to be alternating right of way and that they're purely being used as speed control measures, there tends to be disrespect of the stop signs. So what ends up happening is over time, you get the rolling stops through intersections. So then people who are crossing the street as pedestrians become less comfortable that the driver that's approaching actually is obeying the stop sign. When you actually really need to alternate the right of way, drivers again start to question whether it was there for speed control measures versus controlling stops. It adds to noise and pollution from the perspective of having to get vehicles to slow down and stop, come to a complete stop, and then they have to accelerate again to resume traveling on the road. So that introduces additional noise and emissions. And what also can happen is that with the proliferation of always stops, it really starts to create an environment where where the drivers and the pedestrians become a little bit entangled and confused in terms of the role of the stop signs. So if there's one thing that I'm not going to say strongly, but from a professional perspective and through all of my years of experience, I've always tried to recommend councils not use the stop signs and always stop as a traffic calming measure. There's other ways of achieving the same objective. I appreciate it's relatively inexpensive, not as much of an implementation cost, but there are a lot of negative impacts as a result of always stop control. So that's why we've recommended in two parts of the plan. One is in the traffic calming protocol, which says that always stops are not to be considered a form of traffic calming. And we've also included an always stop policy in the plan, which says that you follow the guidance that's laid out in Ontario Traffic Manual Book 5, which basically says you only use them to alternate right away. And it sets out minimum traffic volumes that are required to achieve that. If it meets, like if an always stop intersection meets those traffic volumes, then by all means install it. But our recommendation is that, just don't use it sort of willy-nilly as a traffic calming measure or a speed reduction measure. So that's our best guidance to you. Obviously, council is at your discretion to adopt bylaws to install always stops. But our recommendation is that you shouldn't get into a war of trying to add more stop signs. There's other ways to achieve the objective in a more efficient way.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Further questions or comments? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jean, for your report. I just wanted to say on page 89, Jean, you talk about roundabouts, and a good friend of mine from Southampton lives north end on the north side of Saugeen River, up in Tanganaga down Ottawa Street area. I just wanted to read something to you that he sent to me, and he's a former senior general manager with commercial tire service facilities across Canada, and he's participated in many training sessions relating to accident avoidance. And here's how this individual explained it, Jean, and I think it's quite good. And you probably heard this before. You see, here's the bottom line: accidents happen in an unsafe workplace for a reason. Find the reason and eliminate it while it is just in unsafe condition. It is the near misses that need to be eliminated. Number one are the near misses. Number two are the minor accidents. Number three, serious accidents with minor injuries. Number four, then serious injuries. And number five, then deaths. And goes on to say that logic says eliminate the near misses and you eliminate the deaths. And as I mentioned above, there have been, I just want to say to you, there have been a lot of near misses, Jean, at that intersection. And I was pleased to see at the intersection of North Rankin and North Rankin Street and Turner Street is the intersection I'm speaking of by Foodland in Southampton. It's a treacherous corner. And that's not just me saying it. This is person who wrote this. It's a fair number of people in Southampton and our tourists that see that intersection as a horrible intersection. So I was pleased to see that we should be reaching out to Bruce County, if there's MTO involved, Bruce County involved, and to take a look at a detailed intersection analysis. And Mr. Mayor, I know I sent you a copy of the email today from Miguel Pelche from Bruce County Transportation, and very interested in carrying out that study and wants to meet with officials here in the town of Saugeen Shores. So I hope that's something that can happen. I have a question for you, Jean. When you talk about future transportation numbers and patterns and levels, and there's a bit of mapping that's not quite accurate in the plan north of Southampton. The Southampton Golf Club is not mapped in the plan. Clancy Builders has some land at the north end that's not in the plan. And there's lands on both sides of County Road 13 that are not on the plan. And I think that it's important, if we're looking at projecting out the numbers of people that are entering that intersection, that we should have that in our plan. If it's outdated Bruce County mapping, that's fine. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. I'm just saying, when we're looking at the number of vehicles that pass through that intersection, we need to make sure we know to 2031 what the future development holds for north of Southampton. There's a lot more residential out there that will happen than maybe the plan is giving it credit for, Gene. And so I think that's a change that needs to be made. The other question the question I do have is about when you talk about the studies, when you do middle of June for traffic counts, the question I have, and it's probably a very simple answer you're about to give to me, but I don't quite understand it. In a tourist town where we attract 7,500 additional tourists in Saugeen Shores through the busy months, takes our population over 20,000. Why did we do a traffic count in the middle of June from a Monday to Friday, and not on a May 24 weekend or a July-August long weekend or middle of July-August when traffic's a lot higher? I don't quite understand that. So that's my first question, if you could answer that one for me.
Through Mr. Mayor to the Vice Deputy Mayor, it's a very good question. We actually talked quite a bit about when was the most appropriate time to do traffic data collection, recognizing that the town experiences a lot of ebbs and flows depending on the time of year. We're concerned about sort of taking a high peak number because, albeit you tend not to design your transportation system for the high peak number when it comes to traffic volumes, because for a vast majority of the year, you've over designed the system. And typically when you're looking at doing these sorts of analyses, because there is random fluctuations that occur depending on the time of year, you try to do sort of the most common day and period of the year is typical industry practice. We picked June, which is actually often not a month we would look at because of the fact that recognizing that there is a higher volume of traffic in the summer. So we would normally try to stay away from June because of the fluctuations with school and the change in travel patterns aren't as consistent. So I guess to make my long answer short, we had regard for the fact that there was different peaking patterns in the town. And we felt that June was sort of a representative normal of conditions from a design perspective.
Okay. I'd suggest, Gene too, and Mr. Mayor, I'd like to think we could reach out to Bruce County in an official manner sooner than later to move forward with that intersection study. I think it's very much warranted there. And there's a lot happening, as we all know. There's the grocery store, there's elevation change, there's a bend, there's blind spots, there's turning. It's a pretty wild intersection. So Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to ask you that question. Is this something that we could do sooner than later, to reach out officially to Bruce County to request that to happen in partnership with the MTO?
Yeah, based on the email that you had, or the email exchange you had with the director of the director of infrastructure at the county. I don't know why I can remember, Mr. Pelche, Miguel. It seemed like he was keen on that he would have an opportunity to complete a study like that in the next year or so. So I think that it's a prime time to reach out to him. And honestly, there's a few things in this plan that we need to talk to the county about. So I think it makes sense for us to have a really formal exchange with them on those items. But that's definitely one I think I can certainly support and help out in communicating with the county.
With that, and I couldn't agree more with the 40-kilometer standard speed limit in town. Bruce Street scares the heck out of me too when the road gets punched through from County Road 25 to Concession 10. I don't know what that's going to bring. I think if I was a resident on Bruce Street, I probably would be concerned, and it'd be nice if those 40-kilometer signs went up sooner than later, in my view. And the stop sign on Joseph Street, I think, would be something that should happen sooner than later as well. I guess the question I have of Amanda is, when we talk about concession 4, I hate to get into specifics here, but just from the email you sent me today, just so I'm clear, the residents have asked for 60 kilometer zone. And so are you saying to me, Amanda, that once the plan's received, and I don't know whether we're adopting this plan, I'd sooner receive it and then approve in chunks, but Is this something that once the plan is formalized, completed, received by council, that you then will adopt those 40-kilometer zones in town? And concession 4, is it a separate report, Amanda? I'm just not quite understanding that yet, because maybe you could explain that to me.
Sure. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, what my intention is after the November 6th receipt of the document, we'll have the final draft of this. So the policies, the complete streets, those things will all be together and understood, I believe, by council and the public well. So we have policies that certain types of roads have certain speed limit ranges. When that is fixed and it's not looking to change, then we'll come back with 2 proposed updates, one for the traffic bylaw and one for the parking bylaw. I envision that we'll have as much as we can swallow in one bylaw update in each of those happening in December. It'll be based on what was received in comments and concerns over the consultation. So as you know, Bruce Street was one that we had a couple speed limits and stop signs. There's a Green Street and Mill Street. There's a couple others that through the years we've looked at and analyzed based on these policies to test how they work. And we'll bring all of those together at one piece, and concession 4 would be in that same group. Then council can decide which ones to include in the traffic bylaw and which ones to not. But that bylaw will again be similar to the parking one, where we'll do some public consultation so people are aware of what these changes that we're proposing are before council finally changes the bylaws.
That's great. Thank you for that. And again, back to Eugene. I was reviewing the Highway Traffic Act today, and I guess I'm going back to concession 4 here a little bit, but it talks about speed limit regulations are primarily defined in the Highway Traffic Act, which states no person shall drive a motor vehicle at a rate of speed greater than 50 km/h on a highway within a local municipality or within a built-up area. So it's a question for Eugene. Could you explain what the definition is of a built-up area?
Through the mayor to the vice deputy mayor. It has to do with the density of driveways under the Highway Traffic Act. So they look at how frequent there are driveways onto the roadway. An area that has more frequent driveways is considered a built-up area. I don't have the specific density offhand, but it's over a distance that they look at it. Over like a kilometer, it has a certain number of driveways.
Okay, I read some about 100 meters and 200 meters, but I understand. So
yeah,
we'll discuss concession 4 a little bit later on in a few weeks, I suppose. There was a recommendation number 26. Talks about required sidewalks on both sides of all newly constructed roads. I'm going to have trouble supporting that recommendation when it comes back. I think when it says on all newly constructed roads, there are just some roads that don't, in my view, do not require sidewalks on both sides. And I take a look at down in Miramichi Bay Estates and Snyder subdivision down in there, and I just can't for the life of me understand why we'd want sidewalks on both sides. So, I sent quite a few notes to you, Gene. 4 or 5 pages today, and I wanted to get them to you a lot earlier, but the 483 pages took a lot longer than what I was thinking. So, but I did send them in to Amanda today, and perhaps Amanda could send them to you. I won't go over all of them. I just have a few more though. Members of the public asked me to raise. The year-round transit service, that's an interesting one, and Councillor Rich mentioned about transient with attainable housing. It's a point well taken. Year-round transit service, you mentioned that it's a high priority with people during the review process. Did I read that correctly, that year-round transportation service will be a recommendation and priority in this plan, is what the wording says? Can you speak to that just for a sec?
Certainly, through the mayor. So we haven't specifically recommended moving forward with public transportation at this point in time, because we fully recognize that there is a significant cost associated with implementing any sort of system if it's sort of conventional or traditional in manner. But there's a lot of different methods of providing people with quote unquote public transportation that are evolving sort of in a shared environment. There's an example, and you may be familiar with the town of Innisfil, that as opposed to implementing a public transportation system, partnered with Uber and created basically an opportunity for people to get personalized rides at lesser rates in lieu of having public transportation. Not necessarily what we're advocating, but there are so many different options available now, or that there is a growing number of options available now, that we feel that it deserves its own more detailed investigation. It was sort of beyond, to be perfectly frank, beyond our scope and our ability to get into that level of detail, given all of the potential consequences of offering public transportation, especially the financial implications. So what we've highlighted in the study is of sort of some typical options, gave you some advantages and disadvantages of those options, and recognizing that that's what we heard from the public, that there is an interest in having public transportation. And we heard it a lot from the individuals that work more sort of in the service type industries, where they're not maybe living in the immediate area and they need a little bit more access to be able to access the service parts of the town where they're providing those retail services, especially during the summer season. And some of them choose to live in the town all year long. So there's a variety of different issues at play, and we didn't feel we could within the context of the work we were doing come up with a firm recommendation to say go down this path, because, and to be frank, it probably would have been the topic of conversation for the entire plan. So it does need some further study and some consideration of what's right for the town.
I appreciate that. That's part of the, I read near the end of the report, $200,000 in future studies. That's probably one of the studies would be part of the $200,000.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. On page 67, I'm just about to two more things. Page 67, County Road 13 is not listed as a future designated arterial or collector road. County Road 13 provides it's an interesting road that brings the traffic up from London through town up to Saugeen Beach. It's a busy road, and I know it's a county road, I get that. But what's the reason for not listing that as a future designated arterial or collector road?
Through the mayor, what we've identified in that table that you're pointing to, table 6.3, is proposed changes to designations. So actually County Road 3 is already identified as an arterial road in your official plan. So
County Road 3, 13.
Or sorry, 13. Yes, 13 is also identified as an arterial road in your official plan. So we don't need to make a change, or we don't need to recommend a change at this point. So it's already considered an arterial.
It's already identified.
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you have another one there, Mike? Or
Yeah, just
okay, sure.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No, it's okay.
That's good. Thanks very much.
That's it. Okay. Okay. Could I just get a follow up too on one of Mike's questions? He had raised a mapping error with regard to development in the Southampton golf course. I just took a look at the map, and it isn't identified as an area of future development. And I just wonder, is that should that be included as an area of future development in that map?
Through Jean and I will talk about that after this. When we did the future developments stuff a year and a bit ago, there wasn't this development happening north of the river. So the general population growth numbers were put in. So we'll look at what these subdivisions look like and see if there's an effect on that growth that they did look at.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I do a follow up on that? I just, some of the tables and some of the traffic flows and traffic growth to 2031, some of the projections are based on development of the north end, and there are 4 parcels that are missing though under planned development. I checked the mapping today, And on both sides of County Road 13, there's plan development. There's Clancy's at the Copway Trail plan development, and there's the golf course. So I think, I think it really does need to be reviewed, because in my view, there's going to be a lot more housing at that north end that's going to affect traffic. So I hope those 4 parcels are added. And
That sounds like staff's going to go back over all that here and have a good look at it and make sure it's up to date and correct. All right, is there, yes, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, Amanda and Jean. This is a very detailed and I think it's a good project plan to move us forward. There's lots to do, but as everybody has said, we all have little bits and pieces that we like and we would like to see adapted. One question for Amanda: the Vice Deputy Mayor asked about the driveways along 21 between Port Elgin and Southampton. One thing that I don't know if we take into account is the fact that one of those driveways is into a trailer park, which has multiple, I think there's over 100 sites in there. So does that change the traffic flow counts because it is a trailer park?
So through you again, Mr. Mayor, this again, that's the county, or that's the MTO section. So it's up to them on how they do that. But I do know the MTO does have a process to determine if you're considered a traffic generator or not. So that is up to the MTO's analysis.
That would be nice to know, though, however, if the trailer park on the highway itself does generate more than one space, because if it doesn't, I think that's wrong. Like I said, there's over 100 campsites in there, which generates more than one person coming in and out of a driveway. So I'd like to find that out if we could from the traffic flow. As Councillor Schreider said, I like 4-way stops. We used to have a 4-way stop on Huron Street in Southampton at Island Street 25 years ago. And I still stop there by, it's just force of habit. I go along and I'll stop at Island. Everybody says, well, what are you stopping for? And I go up to Bay Street and there's the stop sign. So it does, you get used to what there is. I'm very happy with the active transportation portion of this. As the former chair of the Active Transportation Recreation Transportation Committee, we have received the bronze designation. In order to move to our silver, we do have to bring in some more changes, and I look forward to working with Jean and Amanda to help bring those in to move us to the silver designation. It takes a lot. As Mr. Minaj has said, sidewalks are important. I would like to see any new development that does go from this point forward. They are responsible for putting them all in. They're there as soon as they're built. But I do believe with the number of students we have in town, and I've been saying this for 7 years, it sounds like a broken record. We do not understand the number of children that we have going to school. And when we move the grade 7s and 8s up to the high school, there are more students walking to school now than ever. And going back in from River Street, Arlington Street, Eastwood, back all through there, walking to the high school. There are no sidewalks on those main roads going to the high school. And once winter comes, it's very treacherous because we're walking on the road with snowbanks, slippery, slushy, all that stuff. So I do believe we have to, if we're going to start sidewalk planning, it should be for all the roads to feed the schools first, and then we move out from there. I do like the idea of roundabouts. I think a roundabout at the Beer Store corner in Southampton, at Aunt Mabel's, and possibly the 10th as 3 potential roundabouts and traffic calming situations. Even at the corner by Highbury Farms where County Road 3 joins. I don't know if there's enough room there, but that is a very busy corner. Now, I don't know whether it was Vice Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mayad, who said, why don't we look at the numbers that generate in July, August? That is a very important thing because the traffic that comes along County Road 3 on any long weekend, every day of the summer, is very busy at County Road 3, and that's where a lot of accidents do happen. So we have to look at stuff like that. The Vice Deputy also mentioned Turner Street in Southampton. Question for Amanda, because that is a highway, could we make Turner Street a one-way street turning into Foodland? Because there are no houses on it. We've subdivided a lot at the far end of that, but if they go in off of Turner Street and then exit out further to the top of the parking lot, they have a clear view of what's coming around the curve. And the problem is when people do pull out of there, they are a little slower, and they must realize that when you exit or enter onto the highway, you have to enter at speed. but that would give them more sight coming over the hill from the north and from the curve to the south. That might be an easy fix for fixing the Turner Street problem. But I look forward to the public consultation. It is important to have the community's input. As Councillor Gray said, we do have cottage areas, although I think our definition of cottage has to change from what it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, because we are not the quaint small town anymore. We are a very busy area, but we have to monitor those areas. We did a great job. Amanda did a great job with the chance review, fixing a problem that was there. One other question was when COVID does end, if it ends, and we get back to our summer traffic flow going down to the tennis court. What a possibility of making that a one-way street for summers. Could we do that with some streets, just seasonal one-way street traffic to help control flow and the way things are moving? That might help slow things down. So lots of questions. I look forward to the public input, more sessions on this, and thank you, Jean and Amanda, for all your work.
Okay, thank you. Are there further comments or questions from members? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Just one final comment about the MTO. It doesn't sit well with me. I want to be very frank about this tonight, and Councilor Grace brought it up. The Southern Rail Trail Association has brought this up on many occasions. We keep saying, what's the MTO, and it's about warrants and it's about driveways, and we just accept it. And I'm not sure we should accept it. And I think there should be a lobbying process happen here and remove the bureaucrats from it. And we as elected officials, no, I'm serious about this. I think we as elected officials should go after the MTO and through our MPP Lisa Thompson and lobby the heck out of our elected officials there and the MTO and say, look, and Councillor Schreider and Councillor Carr have been on Saugeen Rail Trail Association for a couple of years, and they know this as well as I do. They wanted to put a piece of asphalt strip of takeoff off of the trail to make it easier for scooters and wheelchairs to cross that highway. And the excuse we got back, the reason we got back from the MTO was your driveway at Highbury Farms. Well, you moved your driveway. One of the reasons you moved your driveway, that excuse has been removed. I think we need to go back to the drawing board here and take the fight to the MTO and to the province and say, look, let's take another look at this 60-kilometer zone, and let's go back to the Saugeen Rail Trail Association request to put that asphalt strip in to allow those wheelchairs and bikes to cross the road. So anyway, I'm just venting here a little bit tonight, but I'm not happy with the answers I'm getting from the MTO, and I'd like to revisit it. So if anyone wants to come on board with me for a notice of motion someday, I would like to drive that forward to see if, I like to look at the warrants. I like to see what they come up with to say, here's why you can't do 60K, because I'm not going to prolong this too much longer. But Craig Leith, Walker to Malmay, there's lots of 60-kilometer zones, lots of 60-kilometer zones in the province of Ontario. And I still say that section and that piece of highway can be 60. Anyways, end of my rant, but I think we should take them on.
I agree with you. The only slight issue I would take with what you said is that we haven't just accepted it. We've lobbied hard for it for quite a long time. I myself have sat across from ministers asking for it, and I know Councillor Grace has, and others have. And if you are bored sometime and want to search YouTube, I'm sure you'll find video of me grumbling miserably to the media about the MTO on the subject and how disappointed I was and still am in their lack of willingness to accept anything from us. One time, Dave Burnside did a drawing of how you could put rumble strips on either side of the road in that area, and they were reconstructing the road, and we offered to pay for it, and they said no. So it's been a painful process, but you're right, and there's no letting up is the wrong answer. So we should carry on, and if anybody wants to bring a notice of motion and fight that fight again, I'm there with you. Is there any further questions or comments from members? I had just a couple of things I wanted to ask. One is with regard to roundabouts versus traffic lights, and it's interesting the comment or the point that's made in the report is about that upfront cost of roundabouts being higher than traffic lights, but but maintenance of traffic lights obviously over time is higher cost than roundabouts. I wonder, has there been some sort of cost benefit analysis done on roundabouts and traffic lights, and a determination of which is lower cost over time? You have any comment on that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. Where the economies come in on roundabouts is when you start to factor in the cost of collisions from a purely, if you're when you're thinking about roundabouts, when you're thinking about them in a new setting where you're not retrofitting the existing roadway, the cost differences are not as severe. So when you're thinking of it in a new situation, they're not as significantly different. When you're thinking about a retrofit situation, though, what tends to drive the cost up are a couple factors. One is the acquisition of property, which is necessary for a roundabout intersection more so than a signalized intersection, and the cost of the retrofit. So you've got a more complicated traffic management situation during the period of construction, which requires a number of stages, which is more expensive to construct. And that tends to be one of the challenges with roundabouts. So in many cases, the upfront installation cost of a roundabout is more than a signalized intersection, unless you're thinking about a situation where it might be in conjunction with a bridge. Because what happens in those cases is you can reduce the cost of, I'm getting into lots of detail, but you can reduce the magnitude of the bridge costs by not having to put additional lanes on it by having a roundabout. So there are a lot of very specific circumstances. Typically, when you're looking at cost benefit analysis, and the region of Waterloo has been doing this for quite a while, as well as there's a guidebook that's produced by the Transportation Association of Canada about designing roundabouts that gets into the whole cost benefit analysis piece. And it's when you start factoring in the cost of collisions that roundabouts become far more favorable from a benefit cost. The issue, though, becomes for municipalities is that they aren't usually on the hook for the costs associated with collisions. It's the general health system. But if you look at it sort of as a public good, a holistic, it doesn't take many collisions to make a benefit cost analysis that roundabout is a better solution.
That sounds like an argument to make to the province of Ontario, maybe for some additional funding to support the construction of roundabouts. Mm-hmm. Good. And the other, I guess, a comment, and more comment than a question, I guess, is on transit and the question of ride sharing. And I think that, this is also, I should say, was subject to conversation just last week at Bruce County, also interested in advancing ride sharing regionally. And I think, but the great hang up to that is our bylaws. And I think we need, so I think there's definitely a push regionally to bring ride sharing services into the region and an opportunity to do that. Great County is working heavily on it, and Bruce County is slightly behind, but catching up. So I think that there's a good possibility we could get some of these ride sharing services into the region, but we must realign our regulatory framework at the local level to allow for that to happen. And so I think a high priority out of this should be a reevaluation of our taxi bylaws and other bylaws that are preventing ride sharing from happening, and to seriously adjust those regulations to allow for that. I think we are, I think it's sort of preventing folks from getting the level of service and the kind of service they need. So I think we definitely need to make that a high priority in this process, because I've heard loud and clear in this, and not just through this process, but all the time, the need for transit services in our community. And we can't, and I think we just have to be straight about it. We can't afford to build a bus service. We can't afford to have a high cost transit service. But the thing we can do is get out of the way and allow folks who will provide those services to do it. So we should get at that. I don't have anything else. The Deputy Mayor, you have anything? You have another comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to agree with you. I remember in the last term of council, we talked about alternative transportation services. And at that time, the services weren't as reliable as they are today. And council voted that down at the time. So I do think it's time that we look at revisiting that bylaw and the situations surrounding it. So whenever we wish to go for that, I fully support it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add on to that, I think in one of the comments in the report was on this issue was talking about SMART, and one of the possible suggestions was extending the types of individuals who would be eligible for SMART services. One of the problems with that, of course, is that that is something that would have to be approved by all members of the SMART board, which is a number of municipalities from Bruce and Grey County. Perhaps the Vice Deputy Mayor, as chair of that committee, would like to comment.
You're absolutely correct, Councilor Grace. We have discussed it at the board level of expanding the level of service outside of, you know, the regular protocol with, you know, with people with mobility issues. And so, yes, we have discussed it, and you're right, member communities would have to agree to that change. We have another meeting this Friday, actually, and certainly can add that on as new business and talk about it again. But we talk about it pretty regularly, although we haven't moved forward with changes. We are talking about it. So.
But first and foremost in that process, we're going to have to get everybody in the region to commit to that style of transit, like to commit first and foremost to SMART and accessible door-to-door transit for access. That's something, frankly, that not every member municipality of SMART is continuing to commit to. But we have to commit to that, and then to commit to expand it. I mean, this requires a regional discussion, a serious one, sooner rather than later. And hopefully we can get all of our partners to agree to that, because we're not the only community with this problem. And you know, we need to get at talking about it more collectively, because not any one of us can solve it on our own either.
The only other comment I'd like to add, Mr. Mayor, about that is and you're aware of this, I did make a presentation to Bruce County Council back in May and asked the county to support the forming of a transportation task force. And they've had one meeting, and we're working on generating a little bit more interest at the county level to see if that transportation task force can't take off. And Councilor Grace, at that point in time, we could really get down into the nitty gritty and talk about those kinds of things with expanding service as well.
You are not the only one working on trying to cook up that interest at the county level. Is there any more comments? If not, I'll just say thank you very much to Jean and to Amanda for your work so far. And I'll remind everyone, anyone who is watching and everyone in the community, that we are still open for public comments on this until mid-November, and keen to get those comments. Council's not going to be considering this again until November the 26th. So there is plenty of time to get more comments in about this document. We're very keen to hear your comments, and council will consider them carefully and try to put together the best plan possible with the help of our capable consultant and director. So thank you guys very much. And that, I guess, moves us to the end of the agenda. So council will be reconvening. We'll be dropping out of this meeting and reconvening for our special meeting. And you all have a separate Zoom link for that. I will reconvene in, why don't we take 10 minutes? We'll reconvene at around 8:40. So can I get a mover and seconder to adjourn? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Schreider. All in favor? We stand adjourned. We'll see you at 8:40.